a year and a half? Okay. I was thinking it was 2 summers ago. Wow. Marriage, new baby, new job, new house. You know, that's like 1,000 out of 1,000 on that stress scale.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good morning.
Jess.
Nice to meet you.
Morning,
Hi.
can I get all in?
Jess, nice to meet you.
Well, we're glad to have you on campus today.
Thank
You
you.
go by Jess or Jessica?
Jessica's good.
Okay, Jessica, we're glad to have you on campus today. We'd like to begin with, if you wouldn't mind, to introduce the institution, and then we'd like to see your organization chart.
Yeah, of course. So like I said, my name is Jess, and the institution that we're talking about here today is SUNY Plattsburgh. It's a New York State school, about 5 hours north of New York City, but only an hour south of Montreal, so very close to the Canadian border, also very close to Burlington, Vermont. And so being that, it pulls mostly from New York, from Long Island, New York City, but also the North Country of New York. Also some students from Vermont, New Hampshire. Some Canadian students, but mostly on the hockey team.
Yes, yes.
So it's a campus of about 6,000 students, mostly undergraduates, about 5,500 of that being undergraduates. The campus really does have a very Adirondack feel, being right outside of the Adirondack Mountains. There are many students that spend their weekends snowboarding, skiing, any real winter sports. It does get very cold there. It can be like in the teens below in the winter, and winter does last until October, until April. So that's a little bit about SUNY Plattsburgh.
Perfect, thank you, thank you. Do you have your chart? You
I
want to share
do,
this,
yes. So as you can see, SUNY Plattsburgh's colors are red and gray and white additionally. But just to, a brief overview of the chart to start, it is a very wide chart. That being, SUNY Plattsburgh is not a very big school. And it also does share its funding with 64 other SUNY schools. So we were looking to be cost effective with the chart. So just 2 outliers I want to point out before I go into the real meat of the chart is the Title IX coordinator and the Student Association president. The Title IX coordinator does not report to the Chief Student Affairs Officer, reports to the president, that being that Title IX, sexual assault awareness, and all those issues are something that I value very greatly, and I think having Title IX coordinator report to the president lets the campus know and sends a message to incoming students that Title IX is important to us. Another advantage to having Title IX report to the president is the government liaison generally does come out of the president's office in this case, and having that guidance will be really important to the Title IX officer and coordinator. The next outlier here is the Student Association president, that is the student body president. And the reason that there's not a direct line like there is for everybody else is that's not an official supervisory role, it's an advisory role. So that arrow back and forth there is really to represent the type of collaboration that goes on between the student affairs officer and the student government president. So the next thing I want to move to is talking about the titles of all the offices and people on this chart. I've chosen not to use an associate or assistant vice president titles. I think that on a campus that is this small, it's important that all of our officers and all of our employees are approachable to our students. And I think the title of assistant vice president or associate vice president often scares students away. Thinks I can't have a relationship, an advisory relationship with that person because they're the assistant vice president. And I think these directors, who are the next people down, are on the ground with students. They have relationships with students. They're talking to students. And so I don't want any type of hindrance to that. I also really strove to have consistency across the levels, so starting with directors going down to coordinators. I think the titles also they come with a connotation attached, especially for the people who we're looking to employ. We want to employ those where they are willing to collaborate with the community, not manage the community. So that's why I made the decision to remove assistant, or to have directors as opposed to assistant vice presidents and associate vice presidents. So the first one I want to start with is the director for student involvement. That is an entire center. Within that, you have the coordinator for fraternity sorority life and that unit. You also have student programs. The coordinator of fraternity sorority life is a typical fraternity sorority life coordinator. No surprises there for you. But for student programs, this is a position that would oversee student voluntary services, your alternative spring breaks, any type of service learning. Additionally, is going to do a student-run late night and some other things. But what's important is that coordinator for student programs is one person overseeing many students. Those programs, including voluntary services, a multicultural alliance, those are all going to be fully run by students, and that person is going to be supervising those students. Those students are going to be paid for that. Next is the director of student conduct. That's the office and unit that's going to deal with any judicial affairs. We'll deal with anything of that nature, things that may come from your housing and residence life or from Title IX, anything of that nature. That person does not have anyone reporting to them. This is a position that one person can do, but it is they can do, not ideal, but in my expertise of the school, I believe that resources are better used elsewhere. Moving on to director of Center for Student Services, we have their coordination of veteran services. The reason that is so prominent is there is an Air Force base in Plattsburgh. So the school has a history of an armed forces association. Coordinator of student accommodations, this would be a disabilities center. I didn't feel comfortable calling it that. I felt as if that was the case, students might be afraid to reach out. Calling it accommodations may make students feel more comfortable. And as long as our orientation staff and our orientation leaders are doing their job and explaining what that means, what accommodation center means and the services they can provide, I don't believe changing the name is going to impact how our students understand what the office does. So moving on to the director of the Career Center. Originally, I considered putting the Career Center in that same bracket with veteran services and student accommodations. All three offices do function in a similar way. However, career services and a career center is it's really what's going to have our students succeeding after they graduate. And being that is so important, I thought it best that it report directly to the Chief Student Affairs Officer. Moving on to Director of Housing and Residence Life. I have split up housing and residence life. Housing being your very administrative, your very bureaucratic functions, assigning roommates, doing all the computer back-end work that goes with students applying for housing, dealing with all the deposits, things like that. And they will work very closely with the, not picture on this chart, but with the financial officer of the college. Residence life is your more typical student affairs, dealing with things like hiring of RAs, training of RAs, roommate disputes, handling issues of gender-neutral housing, things like that, that once policy has been set, it can be moved to housing to administrate that policy. From there, Director of Health, of Health and the Counseling Center. This is one giant entity. There are a number of places that students can go in the Plattsburgh community for any type of counseling and health services, but it is important that we have a place on campus. So then moving on from there, Director of Special Programs. So the first one we have is the coordinator of the Educational Opportunity Program, and that's a program that serves underrepresented, under-resourced students, takes them from they're recruited as high school students and come into SUNY Plattsburgh on a number of scholarships and a lot of financial aid. And that program is more or less the embodiment of a living learning community in a student's everyday life. They'll attend meetings, they'll have requirements, and there will be separate tutors and funds available to the students in this program, separate from what is generally offered. Moving on from there, the coordinator of Upward Bound. Upward Bound is another program that involves providing different opportunities for underrepresented and underprivileged students. Upward Bound would allow students still in high school and sometimes as young as middle school to come to SUNY Plattsburgh's campus during the summer, experience a camp for one, but more teaching them leadership skills, helping them with their academics. And that's a program that would happen every summer. And, our last two are the police chief. Again, Plattsburgh is not a very big community and also has Plattsburgh is an incorporated city, and so they have their city police as well. And so it's not a very big department, but it would collaborate with the city police as well. And last is the director of intercollegiate athletics. And so this director is going to handle all the Division III sports that the school has. And it will, reporting to that person would be the coordinator of recreation. So that includes recreation sports, so your non-varsity sports. There are not a lot. There is one recreation sport that actually travels to other campuses. All the other recreation sports are things like indoor soccer, where you have 6-on-6, softball teams, things like that. So this is not a position that requires a lot of accommodations as far as travel is concerned. They're not going to be dealing with transportation for their teams. And they will also oversee the fitness center and the recreation center. So if you guys have any questions, if you need any clarifications, please let me know.
Thank you. Appreciate you sharing your vision for student affairs at Plattsburgh. We've got questions now, and I'd like to begin with, I notice on your chart you have the Chief Student Affairs Officer reporting directly to the President.
Mm-hmm.
I'm intrigued with the size of this campus when you might not think the Chief Student Affairs Officer might be better positioned going through the academic affairs or the programs.
Mm-hmm.
So would you explain why you think the Chief Student Affairs Officer should go directly to the President? Yeah,
of course. Student affairs is a really important part of any student's college experience, whether they know it or not. This campus is very well tuned to a student affairs backbone. That being said, there are a number of other offices that could have been put in student affairs that are in other departments. So allowing for that kind of that permeation or that division of resources allows for a real care for each student. So things like a Center for Diversity, that would be housed in academic affairs, but could very well also be inside of student affairs, things like that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I know that you explained why you didn't have vice presidents
Mhm.
and other titles like that.
Yeah.
Can you tell me why you maybe didn't give the Chief Student Affairs Officer a title other than Chief Student Affairs
Mhm.
Officer, like maybe Dean of Students, that's more welcoming to students?
Yeah. So Dean of Students is something that I considered for a long time. I think to student affairs professionals, it's very obvious, like this is the Dean of Students, this is what the Dean of Students does. It's very steeped in student affairs history. But I do think it's confusing for students. The Dean of Students sometimes sounds a little scary. Growing up, kids and students will hear, oh, you have to go to the dean, you've done something wrong. And that's not the attitude I wanted to portray. It's not something that I wanted to contribute to. It also alleviates the idea of, oh, that's Dean Rappaport. No, that's just Jessica. I think students being on a first name basis with their advisors and supervisors is a good thing.
Do you feel in the position that you could make that change even having a title like Dean of Students? Like if you wanted your students to call you Jessica, introducing yourself as Jessica instead of Dean of Students or instead of Chief Student Affairs Officer? Would you set that standard, not the title?
I think both. I think just by introducing myself, students would understand that you don't call me Dean of Students, you call me by my first name. But even when looking on a website, students sending emails, I don't want it to be addressed as Dean of Students Rappaport or Mrs. or Miss. It just should be first name. And I think sometimes even that just looking on the website really, or looking on a website or looking on a chart really kind of gets students uncomfortable, or they say, oh, I have to call you by this. This is the formal way to go.
I'm curious, and I want to go back to the question about the Chief Student Affairs Officers. Are the other positions reporting directly to the president, are they like Chief Business Officer or Chief Information Officer or Chief Academic Officer?
They are, yeah. They would
They
follow
are?
along that pattern.
Really?
Except for the dean of the so academics would be the dean, would just be considered the dean or the provost.
Interesting. Okay. So admissions,
Mhm.
D3, non-scholarship. How many of your students would you say are varsity D3? Ballpark, just proportion, out of 5,500 undergraduates.
Maybe 600.
So over 10%.
Mm-hmm.
Why not have your director of athletics report to, say, either your president, because of the impact that NCAA kind of prefers athletics reporting directly to president, but in a lot of cases it's not.
Mm-hmm.
But you report it there because of, say, alumni, donations, visibility,
Mm-hmm.
or admissions.
So to answer the first part of your question, alumni are not very attached to our athletics, with the exception of hockey. And hockey does take up a big portion of the intercollegiate athletics attention and resources, but it's not necessarily used as a recruiting tool. More the atmosphere and the setting that the college is in is used as a recruiting tool. Being near the mountains, being near Lake Champlain, being close to Montreal in Canada.
I'm going to ask one more kind of different and go the other. And this is somewhat related to the kind of the whole title thing. At this point, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4. You've got 9 people reporting to the VP or the Chief Student Affairs Officer, plus kind of this advisory role of Chief of Student Government. That's a large span of control.
Yeah.
If there was one position that you might, is there one of these people that you might elevate and give them sort of maybe sort of a number 2 position? Who would your number 2 be in this model? Because everybody needs a good number 2.
Mm-hmm. I would have to say housing and residence life. They do deal with a majority of our students, whether it's only for a year or if it's for all 4 years that they're attending Plattsburgh, they will interact in one way or another with a majority of our students. And I think that's what's most important, is having the most contact with students and the most appropriate and effective interaction with students.
Quick question, how many of your students live in residence halls?
Right now, I believe it's at I believe it's at about 800. No. Almost half, I would say.
So about
Almost half.
2,500 or so?
Mhm.
Okay.
I'd like to pick up on the title conversation as
Yeah.
well. First of all, I want to let you know I appreciate you sharing your philosophy on that. But one person on that span of control is listed as a police chief.
Mhm.
I've wondered if there might be an alternative title to a
Mhm.
police chief, such as a director of public safety
Mhm.
or something like that. Is that something you would consider?
It definitely is something I would consider. The reason that I didn't change it to be director of public safety is the idea of police, cops. It is so steeped in a way of thinking for America that to change that title might not attract the type of people we're looking for. Or people might say, I don't want to be a director of public safety, I want to be a police chief. And so just making it more attractive to potential employees.
Do you think the title Director of Public Safety might be more meaningful on a college campus rather than a police chief?
I think that depends on the student population you're working with. I think there is a lot of, talking about SUNY Plattsburgh, there are a lot of students that come from Long Island, New York City, where you don't have directors of public safeties, your uncles, your brothers, your dads, your aunts, your uncles, your moms are sergeants in the NYPD, or they're a Suffolk County cop. And so to keep some semblance of home for them or some familiarity is going to be important.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, your coordinator of student programs,
Mhm.
you said that this person supervises all of these groups and
Mhm.
paid students.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a reason that these, you said SBS, Late Night, a Multicultural Alliance, and a couple of others,
Mm-hmm.
Are there a reason that they're paid students and not just volunteers like other campuses? Or is also your student association president a paid student? How does that work to make that balance?
Yeah, so student association and any officers are non-paid. It's actually the only SUNY school that does not pay their student government officers. And I am of the mindset that when you run for public office, it's not for money. It is for your beliefs or your desire to make the place you're at, a better place for everyone else. And so that's not the mindset going into this idea of student-centered programs necessarily. I would hope that those are the students that we are hiring, but at the end of the day, they're not putting forth policy, they're not speaking as advocates on behalf of their fellow students, they're putting on programs, and programs that are going to affect our students.
Okay, let's call the role play off.
Okay.
Nice job, Jessica.
Thank you.
You represented yourself well here. We are making notes, so there will be some additional feedback that will come your way. But we kind of like to now provide you the opportunity to see the type of conversation that would happen once you left the room.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so some of it might be directed straight at you, but it might also be more of a conversation amongst ourselves. So anything stand out or any concerns among that you two have here?
I will give you one piece of advice. Pick a name. Either
Yeah.
go with Jessica or go with Jess, because you introduced yourself as Jess.
Yeah.
Dr. Wessel asked you if you went by Jessica or Jess, and you said Jessica, But then when you were talking later in your presentation about how you would want your students to address you, it was Jess.
Okay.
So pick a name and be consistent.
That's good.
I was a little confused by that too. I
Okay.
thought, did I hear that right? So,
Right.
Okay.
yeah. Not everybody in your interviews will be paying full attention
Mhm.
at all times. So, just saying. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna, a couple things. First of all, I thought you did a great job of responding to questions. One of the things that always makes me nuts is when people answer questions that were not asked, and you answered the questions that were asked. Now, I may not necessarily have agreed with your responses, but I thought your responses were well considered, and they were thoughtful. In fact, I thought this is one of the most thoughtful presentations that I've seen in the 5 or 6 years that 5 years or so.
She
that
does
I've
well
been
with
doing it.
dialogue, doesn't she?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Really thoughtful. You
You
know,
could see, and you responded with, here's why I did that. Here was my thinking behind that. I thought that was really.
yeah, and I think that kind of response opens up dialogue. It's like, rather than, yeah. So with that being said, let me say a couple things about organization chart. Number one, it's gotta be, I cannot see it.
Okay.
And thinking about who am I, you have to kind of think about, I love the color and use of all that kind of thing, but the thing is, if you're gonna use color, you gotta use it correctly, and you've gotta think about who is going to see this. Not only do you need to think about that, but think about, okay, I've got a document that is gonna be Xeroxed 100 times
Right.
before there's gonna be somebody who's gonna see a document that's probably been Xeroxed 3 times. And red is gonna show up as black, which is not a bad thing if you've got white on black, but white on red is this particular red is kind of a low contrast with the white. So between the very, very small letters and the low contrast, it was actually this part was really difficult for me to read.
Okay.
As opposed to Plattsburgh, which is very easy to read. And then I'm looking for a balance there. As a person who's mid-50s, that's really important to me.
That's a good point.
And I'll just go back and just, the span of control is, there's a point where your VP or your Chief Student Affairs Officer in this case, which I thought was really interesting. All they're doing is sort of meeting with their direct reports, and they've got other stuff they've got to do. It's really important, even at a place with 6,000 students, to have a number 2, or maybe a couple, like a 2 and a 2A. And I thought your pick of housing was a really good choice. Another choice might be to kind of elevate that person, because not only they're handling half your students, they're also generating a buttload of revenue for the institution. But that may be where your director of student conduct, because you had some qualms about a one-person office.
Yeah.
That's where you might make it a dean of students and kind of spread the love as far as conduct a little bit.
Well, you could also, I mean, again, I think your logic on, I want to make sure they're not an associate vice president is a little odd. But that's what you believe, and so that's fine for you to believe it. But staying with that logic, you could still have an AVP role and call him a director.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so if it's all about the title, you still, for example, could have taken student conduct and moved them under student services,
Yeah.
right? The career center and moved them under something else, so that you had a little more of a hierarchical approach. And again, I'm not saying that your logic wasn't, I mean, you were saying you want to be in touch and you want those people touching people. I think you can still accomplish that with a little more of a hierarchical organization.
In fact, it makes it easier for this VP to be in touch with the people or students that she might want to be in touch
Absolutely.
with. If other people are doing parts of the job that she doesn't need to.
I also think it would be very difficult to hire people and have people want to come and attract the right people to a position like that as just calling it the Chief Student Affairs Officer. Because when people do searches for positions like that, they're not searching for Chief Student Affairs Officer, they're searching for Vice President.
Right.
A lot of people, when they're looking at institutions and looking at their next steps, that title is what they're going for. So I understand in your part here, you're going for that position, but if you were looking at that from other people trying to also apply for that position, that wouldn't be as attractive.
Yeah.
You might
So.
lose some people in the pool simply because of the title. She present herself okay? Any concerns here when she came in, or?
Here's the one thing, is that I'm trying to decide, I think on interview day, I think your dress has got, I mean, your outfit has to be a notch up. I think it's like close, but still a little too casual.
Okay.
Interesting.
The rolled sleeves,
Maybe that's it.
it needs to be a full sleeve, needs to
Okay.
be very formal, especially for this sort of a position,
Yeah,
I would say.
yeah,
I
I
think
think
that
that's,
kind of caught me off guard.
that's it, right there.
So
Okay.
Just very minor, but
Yeah.
but
Just
something
minor
to
tweaks.
think about.
Okay.
Okay.
But yeah, I thought you did a great job, Jess.
The other thing I would suggest is changing it up a little bit when you're moving on
Yeah.
from stuff. You said moving on
Yeah.
about 15 different times. So maybe just have another couple
You'll
words
see that
in
when you
there.
watch the video.
Yeah, I
And
can't
I
wait.
I also think you'd be surprised to know just how much Plattsburgh incorporates athletics into admissions and recruitment. I suspect there's probably more of that going on than as a student you might have seen.
Yeah.
Could very well be.
But yeah, coming from St. Cloud State where all the teams were D2 and the 2 hockey teams were D1, yeah, I know how I know how that works, so.
Okay, Jessica, nice work.
Well, thank you, guys.
We'll get more feedback for you here in the next class.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.